Hello, BookTube. I fell down an internet rabbit hole this morning. We've mentioned those on this channel. We just watch one video after another on a certain subject, and of course the implication of a rabbit hole is that it's not researched. That the subject is ultimately unworthy of all that obsessive attention. You're doing it anyway. And I have clawed my way out of that rabbit hole, and I thought before I get back to work, why not make a silk purse out of a sow's ear and make a tag out of that rabbit hole. And so I present to you today the Cryptid Book Tag. now cryptozoology is cryptids are beings, animals, basically, that certain enthusiasts, certain devotees, including a handful of scientists, think might exist in the world but have not yet been definitively discovered. So in the 1840s, the okapi, or the gorilla, the silverback gorilla, would have been cryptids, because explorers would have heard all sorts of stories from the people who lived in Africa that these animals existed. They would have heard all sorts of stories of what they looked like, but there would have been no evidence. And then there was evidence, then more and more evidence, and finally things started to align in the minds of enthusiasts of cryptozoology to say, well, if it could happen before, it can happen again. If we didn't know about the billy ape until just comparatively recently, then who knows what other large animals we don't know about, despite living in an age of massive deforestation, despite living in an age of satellites in orbit, despite living in an age where every single person is walking around every single minute of every day with high-resolution camera on their person. Despite any of that, these devotees of cryptozoology say, there might still be these large animals out there. Usually cryptid fans are not really interested in new kinds of bacteria or new lizards in the Amazon or anything like that. They're looking for something big. and I was introduced to cryptozoology in a series of old pulp paperbacks that would be on the spinner rack and have lurid black and white photos and whatnot. And of course there was the TV show In Search Of, which was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, who had been on Star Trek, so I was going to watch anything he did, and which gave you in a neat 30-minute format the rundown on a whole range of cryptids, in addition to a whole bunch of other things. Of course, when I say cryptids, I'm not talking about UFOs or lizard people running the world or anything like that. I'm talking about animals, basically animals, no matter how smart their devotees might say they are. And I also learned a lot about these things and listened endlessly to the great radio personality Art Bell, who had a very big sweet tooth for cryptozoology and also a very canny eye for what drew in his listenership. So he had lots and lots of hours of late night radio about cryptozoology, talking to people who were out in the field, talking to people who had encounters and wanted to tell him their story, talking in one particularly disturbing segment that he returned to over and over again because he found it fascinating and also disturbing, talking with a hunter named that he called Bugs, who was out one night hunting bobcats with two of his buddies from all three of them ex-soldiers from Vietnam. When they saw a hominid being, they were hunting at night with spotlights, they saw a hominid being that they could not identify. They weren't sure what it was, and they opened fire on it and killed it, and then eventually tracked it and killed its mate and buried them and swore an oath of secrecy. And Bugs tells Art Bell that he's left a detailed map of where to find the remains, and he's given it to Art Bell so that when he dies, all will be revealed. And the reason is pretty obvious. I mean, when pressed, Bugs in interviews would say, well, no, I thought it was a bear. But he clearly didn't. He clearly knew that it was not a bear. He says many times that he and his buddies have been out hunting everything that moves and knew it all to the last degree. So they only had to see eyes reflected in spotlights to know what kind of an animal it was. They knew that this was bipedal, and they knew that it was not a bear, and they opened fire on it anyway. And the reason why Bugs did not want to give the location, the reason why he didn't want to be famous as the man who uncovers, who presents to the world actual physical evidence of Bigfoot, is because he didn't want to be arrested for murder. He didn't want to lead the cops to the location of two bodies and find out that they're just people, they're just human beings, and that he and his friends killed them for sport. But Art Bell didn't just talk to bugs. He talked to lots and lots of other people, and he had a wonderful manner on radio as well. So I learned a lot about cryptozoology, the world of it, from him. And from that weird, fervid, fever-ridden world, I have developed some prompts for you. So prompt number 1. A cryptid is a mystery animal whose fans say it definitely could exist. How do you deal with books recommended to you by the book's fervent true believers? That's a very open-ended question. I'm not asking for specific books. I'm just asking for your method of dealing when you reveal to someone that you are an active, avid reader, and their eyes light up, and they come back to you with a book they love or an author they love, and maybe they don't realize that you've already read the author. Maybe they don't realize how widely read you are, and you know already that look in their eyes, so that even if you haven't read the author or the book, you're going to be extremely leery. You're going to think, okay, this is a person who doesn't read much, and this book rocked their world. How do you deal with such a person? If they, like, for instance, if they press the book on you, do you say, oh no, I'll get a copy of my own? Or what about a week later when they say, did you read that? Did you read what I was talking about? Wasn't it great? How do you deal with it then? You obviously haven't read it. If you haven't read it already, you're not going to read it on the urging of a fan. So what do you say? I'd love to know your own strategies, because maybe yours are better than mine. I fall back completely on the dodge of my profession. For those of you who are new to the channel, there are almost 100 of you who are new to the channel. Since the last time I said that, we're coming up on 7,100. So but anyway, I'm a professional book reviewer, and so I can fall back on that. So if somebody says to me, oh my God, I love this book, I love this author, and let's say I've heard of the book or I've read it, and I didn't love it, and I think, well, the only reason why you would be going nuts about this thing is if you don't read a lot. When they say to me, have you read it? I can always say, I have a lot to read. I have a lot to read just for deadlines, for money. And that tends to silence the subject. That with anybody, that tends to silence the subject. If I say that money is on the line, that it's a job of mine, that tends to silence the subject. Every once in a while, I'll get a very persistent person who will say, no, I'm going to send you this book. And I'll say, no, don't send me a book. Don't send me a book. If you want me to bring it to my attention, let me know what it is, and I'll get a copy. And sometimes they send it anyway, and I get a copy. And then a week later, they say, well, did you read it? I'd love to know what you think. And I say, no, I've got a lot of reading to do. For work, I read all the time for work. I'll get to it when I get to it. And then maybe 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, they're still asking me, did you get to that book? I'd love to know what you think. That's when I tend to get a little bit defensive. My hackles go up just a bit. And if they keep going, if it's the only thing that I know they're going to talk about when I see them next, where it just becomes a compulsive reflex and they're never going to drop it, then I feel free to get, as obnoxious as they're being to me, and just tell them, well, what you're asking me to do is read a book on spec for you and give you detailed analysis of it. And I'd be happy to quote you my going rate for doing that. That is, in fact, my job. And if you knew someone down the street who made professional grade furniture, worked on a piece for a month or two at a time for a high-priced bidder, you wouldn't ask them to make a piece like that for you on your demand, on your timetable, and for free. That's what you're asking me to do, and you got to stop. If you want me to prioritize this so that I have read it and have extensive critical reactions the next time I see you, then pony up $1,000. And usually that drops the subject. But I'd love to know what your methods are for doing that, because I could maybe learn from them. Then question number 2. Cryptozoology is typically mocked as a pseudoscience pursued by charlatans and scientific illiterates. I'm being harsh here, but it's out of love. And yet it's oddly fun to investigate, and I am here to second that. That I may be regretting that rabbit hole that I went down, but I'm regretting it now, but I loved it at the time. Name a non-cryptology kind of book. In other words, it can't be about any cryptid or cryptozoology. Name a non-cryptology kind of book that's likewise fun, but deeply, deeply flawed. The type of thing where you're really enjoying it when you're reading it, but you have no defense when you're done. None at all. And for me, as for a lot of people, I suspect, it's Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, which is a propulsively readable book, even though it is god-awful trash. just awful from start to finish on every level. Character, dialogue, conception, world building, all of it. Just absolutely, absolutely awful. And yet, she writes with this kind of a dumb, headlong jog of a tone that works. It absolutely works. I can understand why that book pulled so many people in. I wonder if it would work on me a second time. Now she has a new book in this world coming out. Part of me has been wondering if I get that book, I'm going to read it, of course. But should I read Twilight? Not all the others, but maybe just reread Twilight just to see if it still does that. I don't know. Then we'll deal with some specific cryptid monsters, because these cryptozoologists don't like the term monster hunter. They like to think that they're renegade scientists, but they're really hunting for monsters. They're not hunting for a kind of frog, unless it's 10 feet tall. They're hunting for things that would scare people. And you cannot tell me, I mean, a lot of these people are respectable, a lot of them are quite intelligent, but you cannot tell me that's not where it comes from, ultimately. But anyway, the first batch that we'll deal with is Cryptid Water-Monsters. And this can be Mokele Mbembe, this can be Champy from Lake Champlain, and of course, most famously, Loch Ness, the Loch Ness Monster. I have heard firsthand accounts of these things many times from people. I have read endless firsthand accounts of them. I have been to the areas. And being in the areas really does kill your belief in the firsthand accounts. It really does. I've said this about Loch Ness, but Lake Champlain, it's the same way. But Loch Ness, when you go there, I mean, it's a lovely place to walk around, but it's completely barren and it's completely severe. And what we're talking about here in Loch Ness is a giant reptile of some kind, or an amphibian of some kind. It's a giant. The prevalent idea is that it's a plesiosaur. That is a giant thing, a giant seagoing prehistoric beast. And you're not talking about just one, right? It doesn't have a time machine. You're talking about a breeding population of these things. So older ones, renegade ones, insane ones, young ones, adolescent ones, male, female, mating, carrying on their lives. And there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere for them to do that anywhere in the environs of Loch Ness where they wouldn't be instantly seen. So it doesn't matter that every once in a while you'll see some grainy tourist footage of a ripple in the water. That doesn't matter. These things would have to eat. There's precious little in Loch Ness to support even one of them, much less a whole breeding population. They'd have to come on shore to eat. And although the Loch Ness Monsters mythos includes many, many eyewitnesses of people encountering something on the roads alongside the lake, and it's not in the lake, it wouldn't be occasional. It would happen all the time. There's no way that there could be a large prehistoric animal living in Loch Ness. A breeding population of them would eat the place out in 1 hour. Not to mention the fact that, as a bunch of scientists have pointed out, Loch Ness itself has frozen right down to the bedrock in glacial periods many times in its history. And then gone thousands of years until it thawed out again. Where were the creatures then? if we're saying that they are holdovers from a prehistoric population, where did they go? They'll take a bus to Argentina until the lake thawed out thousands of years later? No, that's not possible at all. But nevertheless, it's prevalent. It's prevalent. When you talk about cryptozoology, the minute you explain what it is to people, the Loch Ness Monster is one of the first things they will mention. And the prompt is, tell me about your favorite water-related book, or a favorite water-related book. And for me, I'm going to pick an author that I really love, Carl Safina. His book, Song for Blue Ocean, is about narrowly construed ocean conservation. It's from 30 years ago, but it's also beautifully written. He's a beautiful prose stylist. So it's not just about conservation. It's about a lot more than that, and it's lovely, just lovely. I was thinking about it just the other day because I just recently read and reviewed his latest book, which is about animal cognition, animal cultures. But Song for Blue Ocean, boy, I wish I had a copy. Don't know where it is. Don't know where my copy is, but I strongly recommend it. Then prompt number 4 is Cryptid Dog-Monsters. And the foremost of these, in my opinion, just based on anecdotal evidence, would be the chupacabra. But there are many of them. There are many brands. There are many dogs feature prominently in cryptozoology. Giant wolves, wolf men, dog men, hybrids, those sorts of things. You can find rabbit holes of your own on any of those things. And the prompt is a favorite book about dog or dog-like creatures. And I chose a dog, an ordinary dog, Kate DiCamillo's book, Because of Winn-Dixie, which was published and marketed as a YA novel about a young girl in the American South who finds a dog, and the dog changes everything. Not just her life, but everybody, eventually everybody in the whole little town. All of those changes, all because of Winn-Dixie. And it was originally written and marketed as a YA novel, but it was a perfect example to me of the kind of YA novel that appeals to anybody. The kind of YA novel that isn't a YA novel at all, or the very best of it. I've mentioned a few of those on this channel. When YA is really good, when it's not pandering to what it perceives as a target demographic, then it can be read by anybody with tremendous enjoyment and emotional impact. Because of Winn-Dixie has a lot of emotional impact. So once again, as with these other books, except Twilight, I recommend it. Then prompt number 5 is a Cryptid Biped-Monster. So a two-legged cryptid of some kind or another. These are the most widespread of cryptid reports, and they are by far the most lurid and by far the best known. You have the Alma, you have the abominable snowman, the Yeti, you have the Florida skunk ape, and you also have, of course, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, in the Pacific Northwest and in Canada. Thousands of first-hand reports, thousands of them, all across a certain swath of the world, made by people who did not expect to be making a report, are not trying to cash in on anything, are worried about losing their job if they go forward, but they feel like they have to say something because they were camping with their friends, way out back in Washington State, and they encountered something that they know was not a bear. They know that it was something they cannot explain. So their natural recourse, if they're not hucksters, if they're not trying to become famous, their natural recourse is to go to the nearest park station and say, well, we're leaving, but I thought I should tell you there's something out there. And then they give their report, and sometimes those reports are duly disseminated. And my point is not that the reports are real. My point is that, my point is not that their reports are true, that there is something unknown out there. I think in almost all cases these people are seeing bears. But the point is that I have to say almost, because there is a great degree of agreement between a lot of these first-hand reports from people who have not gone down rabbit holes. They have not studied them. It leads me to wonder exactly the kind of open-ended question that gives birth to the whole discipline of cryptozoology in the first place. It leads me to wonder if there might not be something to it. Now, I'm not saying what the prevalent idea among Sasquatch, Bigfooters, is that it is a primitive offshoot of Homo sapiens. That somehow just missed going extinct and is living in the last thickly forested areas of the world. I don't think that quite works. I don't think that quite, unless we're talking about something with super intelligence, and quite a few New Age lunatics who've bought heavily into the Bigfoot mythos say that it does have super intelligence, and not only that, but mystical powers that can walk between dimensions and things like that. And they have to do that. They're driven to do that because they have already realized that if they're saying that instead of having those mental powers, it is just an animal, maybe a less cognitively developed branch of human, then it wouldn't hide. And even if it hid, actively from humans who were pursuing it in the wild, it wouldn't know to hide from drones or infrared cameras or trail guide cameras. It wouldn't know to hide its young. It wouldn't know to bury its dead. It wouldn't know to move on away from humans systematically. I don't think that is true. I think instead, some of these people, the ones who obviously aren't playing a game and who genuinely were surprised by what they saw, and some of those people have experience in the backcountry. Sufficient that you listen to them and you think, all right, well, I don't at all get the impression that you're trying to game the system. But I also don't at all get the impression that under any circumstances you could mistake something that wasn't a bear for a bear, not you, because you seem to, every once in a blue moon, one of these people will have extensive outdoor experience. Enough so that they wouldn't mistake anything for a bear under any circumstances. Bears, let me tell you, I've seen them endlessly in the wild, and they can be deceptively human-looking. They really can. They can go for extended periods of time on their hind legs, and they move around. When they move around, when they're on their hind legs and you see them from the rear and they reach up and maybe they've got a very thin summer coat on, it can look like you're looking at a human or a humanoid. When you're not, you're looking at a four-legged animal. But one way or another, sometimes you will get somebody with a Bigfoot story who isn't making it up, isn't trying to pull one over on you for publicity's sake and wouldn't be fooled by a bear. There are those, and those are weird. Those give me pause. They really do. And the prompt for this one is, could you name a favorite book of yours, a book you enjoyed, about a hominid that is not Homo sapiens? And for me, I chose, there's an old science fiction novelist, Frank Robinson. He did a generation ship, hard science fiction story about a ship with generations of passengers on a long, long interstellar voyage that was really, really good. But he also did a book called Waiting that was set in the normal world. It didn't have any of the trappings of science fiction about it. But the premise of the book was that a branch of hominid, a branch of human, had evolved this whole time alongside humans and in hiding from them, and advanced in different ways, and was malevolent, wanted to replace humans with themselves, which is not science fiction, of course, because that's just what Homo sapiens wanted to do with all the species of human that it encountered, and that's just what it did. It just didn't use science fiction superpowers the way they do in Waiting, but nevertheless, that is what Homo sapiens did. The reason there are no other species of humans in the world is because of Homo sapiens. And this species in Waiting, it's a really good book. It's well done. I think Robinson is better served. I think his fiction gets better the further out from normal reality that it goes. So his hard science fiction I like better. But this is still very enjoyable. And I think he wrote sequels to it that I've never read, which would be really bad. If he did, I should find them and read them. Then prompt number 6 is a cryptid avian-monster. There are some. You could, I guess, say that the Mothman and all of the mythology that sprung up around the Mothman would be vaguely considered avian cryptid sightings. I didn't include the Mothman in this particular tag because quite a bit of the Mothman mythology has him being sentient, a supernatural sentient being. There's a lot of baggage that goes with Mothman, so I left him out. But there is another one that doesn't have baggage. It is completely unbelievable. It's on the total fringes of even the cryptozoology world, because there is no possible way that it could exist, and that is so-called thunderbirds. Ordinary birds, whether they be corvids or whatever, hawks or eagles of some kind, that are enormous. That sometimes eyewitnesses or the few cryptozoologists who specialize in thunderbirds will say that sometimes they have the wingspan of an airliner. And you can see right away the problem with that. There is absolutely no way you could hide such a being. Not only would it not hide from anybody, but it couldn't. Such a being would have to nest in the open. Think of an osprey. Ospreys don't hide in the woods. There's no possible way that you could hide this thing. And all of the film clips that you can see are obviously wrong. They're either obviously faked in order to bilk the credulous, or they're just obviously a telephoto lens. Your fake meter, your fakeometer will go off right away when you see the footage that's on YouTube of any kind of thunderbird. They're not believable. But nevertheless, they exist, so they made it onto this tag. And the prompt for this one is a favorite book featuring birds. And for me, I have one that I don't think is out yet. It's The Bird Way by Jennifer Ackerman, who did The Genius of Birds. And she's great writing about birds. She's just fantastic. I'm really sort of hoping, wistfully, that The Bird Way gets a shot at being a printed book. It's, I think, coming out at just the wrong time. I think that it will be scheduled to have a hardcover dust-jacketed release with beautiful cover artwork right around the same time that America is posting thousands and thousands of viral deaths a day. Thousands and 10,000 viral deaths a day, 20,000. And if parts of America are posting numbers that dire, bookstores won't be open. So I don't know if I'm ever going to see this book as an actual printed book, but I have already read the ebook and I loved it. Just loved it. But that was predictable because this author is so good writing about birds. So The Bird Way, we're all going to have to reconfigure our TBRs and what we're talking about when we talk about a TBR, because who knows how long the bookstores will be closed, and who knows when the publishing industry will rev back up to anything like normal, up and running. Might never happen again. We might be forced. The whole reading world might be forced to move mostly to ebooks. Imagine that. But one way or another, I recommend it. You're bound to be able to find it, and when you can download an ebook, to the comfort of your iPad or to the comfort of your bright red Kindle Nook or whatever. You can't say these devices aren't comfortable. The only thing that's uncomfortable about it is that you're paying through the nose for something you don't even own, that you're just leasing. That's going to have to change. If the publishing industry wants these things to take off, they're going to have to change that. But you'll still have access to the book is what I'm saying. I don't think there are many people listening to me. There can't be many people listening to me who have never read an ebook. Can there? There's no way. I always think when I think about the people who are listening to me, it's unfair. But when I think about the people who are listening to me, I always think about the first 100 people who listen to me, and I think about like Olive or Sue Morrow or Joe, the retired bookworm. I think about people who, and I think, well, I know that you read some ebooks. I know you do. Sue reads an enormous amount on her e-reader, and Olive made a great video about falling in love with ebooks at last. So, but are there? I mean, is there anybody listening to me right now doing this after 25 minutes? I wouldn't be surprised if nobody's listening to me. But is there anybody listening to me that has never read an ebook? Well, one way or another, it's a very comfortable experience. It's just got some annoying, nagging little features to it that need to change to make it totally comfortable. And then the last one, the next prompt we'll do, I am going to finish up, don't you worry. This does not go on forever, as much as I love cryptozoology. The next one we have is Cryptid Cat-Monster. There are quite a few Cryptid Cat-Monsters out there. And the one I chose is the Beast of Exmoor. Although there are the Beast of, and then fill in the blank, there are a number of those locations in the Scottish Highlands or something like that, where there are no big cats. And yet there are persistent reports of them. And those are fascinating to me. These are cases where I firmly believe there is something. This is not that hard to believe. A lot of these other things, Thunderbirds, of course, are completely impossible to believe. Sasquatch is really hard to believe. Loch Ness Monster is impossible to believe. Chupacabra, that isn't. I maintain that chupacabras are rabid dogs, rabid mange-ridden dogs. Plenty of those, and they don't look like dogs or act like them. You could know dogs your whole life and see the body language of an animal so horribly afflicted, and you wouldn't think you were seeing a dog. So that I'm not hard to explain. And the beast of fill in the blank, these large cat cryptids, are also not hard to explain. It's no stretch of the imagination to think that somehow there's a breeding population of larger cats. Even the ones that are sable black could easily come from somewhere. And this is also a rare case in cryptozoology where the footage that is available, there isn't much of it, the footage that is available is obviously not faked. You are obviously looking at film footage of something in a Cornish dell that absolutely shouldn't be there. A thing that's as big as a bobcat or even bigger. The prompt for this is a favorite book featuring a cat, extra points if the cat is enormous and terrifying. And I picked The Great Soul of Siberia by Soo-Young Park, a wonderful, feeling book about Siberian tigers. One of the biggest kinds of tigers in the world, and one of the rarest, and one of the most endangered, one of the most heavily hunted and poached and whatnot. And the book looks at that with wide open eyes, but it manages to be beautiful as well. Again, another example of a book that I read and loved, remembered for this tag, and wish I still had. I don't even know if it had a paperback, or if I'm blurbed on that paperback. No idea. But I loved it. Thought it was fantastic. And then prompt number 8. Prompt number 8 is going to be a little disturbing. I'll warn you ahead of time. It's the final prompt. And I saved the best for last. Prompt number 8 asks a simple question, book 2. Are you, in fact, a cryptid? I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And if for every yes answer that you give to one of these questions, I want you to keep track. Every yes answer is a point. Question A. Are you often met with disbelief or horror by those who encounter you? Question B. Are there people in the world who consider you mostly or entirely mythical? Question C. Is there anything about you that science finds puzzling? Question D. In your natural state, do you typically emit odd noises or odors? Question E. Are you an evolutionary dead end scorned by the modern world? And question F. Do you occasionally exhibit near-human levels of intelligence? And you want to take those questions and count up your yeses. And here is the last bit of advice I have for you before I tag people. If you scored 2 or higher, then I want you to send a saliva swab, some nail clippings, and a bag of your poop to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City and await their verdict. And since tag creators are supposed to answer their own prompts, I will tell you that I scored well above 2, but I will also reassure you that I've been sending bags of my own poop to the Natural History Museum for God knows how long. So they know my return address well. And that is the Cryptid Book Tag. And all that's left for me to do is tag my fellow cryptids. I have a batch of the old favorites here. I want to tag Jason at Byways in Bookland. I want to tag Sean D. Standfast. I want to tag Mark at Richardson Reads. Todd from Todd's Bursting Bookcase, my fellow members of the OGBG. Peg at the History Shelf. I want to tag Mike at Pints and Paperbacks. I don't know if they have cryptids where he is. I tag Brian at Bookish, Texas. Hotbed for cryptid activity. I tag Roz at Scallydandling About the Books. Ever encountered a slightly alarming creature? Let me hear all about it. I tag Sarah at Steeped in Books. Now that you're in a new location, you'll have whole new cryptids to deal with. So that is the Cryptid Book Tag. And of course, Britta. It's not going to surprise you at all to learn that Germany has an incredibly low number of cryptid sightings, because if you were to ask a typical German, they would say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Germans, what are you going to do? Can't live without him. The world has tried. Anyway, I tag Britta as well. So that is the Cryptid Book Tag, which is an absolute travesty because I have so many tags to do. But I had to do something with that rabbit hole to justify myself, so now I have. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.